Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into a really volatile situation, one with massive global implications. We're talking about the Iran-Israel conflict, specifically the recent intense escalation.
Yeah, definitely intense.
Our mission, like always, is to cut through all the noise, pull out the essential stuff from your sources, and give you a really clear picture of what's actually going on.
Absolutely. It's definitely complex. And beyond just the headlines day to day, we want to connect the dots for you. The strategy, the undercurrents, the potential ripple effects.
Right.
So you can really grasp not just what's happening, but why it's so important and what it all might mean down the line.
Exactly. So think of this as your shortcut, really, to getting up to speed on this whole escalating situation. We'll connect those dots, point out some maybe surprising details, and hopefully you'll walk away feeling informed, not totally overwhelmed.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's get right into it. So we're basically heading into week 2 of this intensified conflict, and it feels like a dangerous new phase.
It does.
One of the biggest things right off the bat, the killing of a top Iranian Quds Force commander. We're talking Saeed Azadi. He's described as a veteran commander in the IRGC's Quds Force.
And just for context, the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, that's Iran's elite force, and the Quds Force is their sort of external operations arm. Very significant.
And Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, he actually confirmed Israel hit an apartment in Qom, killing Azadi.
Yeah, and the significance of hitting a commander that high up really can't be overstated. This isn't just, another tit-for-tat strike.
Right.
It suggests a possible shift, maybe a more aggressive phase in Israel's targeting, moving maybe beyond just proxies to perhaps directly targeting Iran's operational leadership. That has huge strategic implications, obviously.
And it wasn't just that one strike, was it? We've seen this pattern, this escalating series of direct military exchanges. After Qom, Iran launched missiles aimed at central Israel, near Holon specifically.
Correct. And then Israel retaliated. They targeted missile storage facilities near Isfahan's nuclear complex. Now, that distinction is important.
Okay.
They hit storage facilities near the complex, not the actual nuclear enrichment facility itself. It's a strategic choice, seems like.
What does that choice signal, do you think, hitting near a nuclear site?
Well, it sends a message, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It shows Israel can hit sensitive targets, even ones linked to critical infrastructure, maybe even nuclear-associated ones. But they stop short of hitting the actual enrichment site itself. That would be a massive escalation, universally condemned.
So it's calibrated. Is it restraint or is it actually raising the risk because it's so close?
It's probably a bit of both. It's definitely a calculated risk. They're showing capability, showing resolve by hitting near sensitive areas, but avoiding that one move that would almost certainly trigger a much wider, much more unpredictable response.
Okay, so with these high-stakes military moves happening, where's the international effort? What about diplomacy to, cool things down? It seems kind of stuck.
Yeah, stalled is probably the right word.
European ministers met with Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araki, in Geneva. They were pushing for nuclear talks, apparently.
They were. But the main problem, the reason it's stalled, is Iran's position. They're saying, basically, we won't negotiate while you're bombing us.
Makes sense from their perspective, I suppose.
Tehran's been explicit. No nuclear talks until Israel stops the strikes. So, Europe keeps pushing for dialogue, but there's this fundamental deadlock right now.
And then there's another huge factor looming over all this potential U.S. involvement.
Right.
President Trump has apparently given himself, about 2 weeks, to decide whether the U.S. should step in more forcefully, maybe even target Iran's nuclear infrastructure directly.
And Iran's reaction to that possibility was pretty stark, very clear. They warned that any U.S. participation would be, quote, very dangerous for everyone.
Wow.
It just highlights the massive risk of this whole thing spiraling into a much wider, much more destabilizing regional conflict if the U.S. does decide to up its military involvement.
Absolutely. And, beyond the strategy and the military stuff, we have to talk about the human cost. It's getting worse. We're hearing about rising civilian casualties, both sides, reports of problems at hospitals, people being evacuated, just this general sense of high anxiety in both countries.
And something that makes understanding the human toll even harder is the information control, particularly in Iran.
The internet blackout.
Exactly. There was a near total shutdown last week. It's apparently easing up a bit now, gradually lifting. But the reason, reportedly, was to control the information flow, both inside Iran and getting out.
So when that happens, a near total blackout, What does that actually mean for us, for anyone trying to understand what's really going on?
Well, it means getting a clear picture is incredibly difficult, right? You're relying heavily on external sources or maybe trickles of information coming out once connections are partly restored. It clouds everything.
Yeah.
Assessing the real scale of damage, casualties, even just public feeling on the ground becomes very, very challenging. It just fuels uncertainty, rumors.
Okay, so as we're sort of digging deeper here, another interesting angle emerges: the type of warfare being used. Israel seems to be using what some analysts call hybrid warfare.
Mm-hmm. That's a key point.
It's not just airstrikes, right? It's combining those with covert stuff, Mossad, drone sabotage, things like that, aimed at degrading Iran's missile and nuclear capabilities. It sounds quite sophisticated, multi-layered.
It is. And speaking of missiles, there's some fascinating data in the sources about Iran's inventory.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, reportedly, Iran has fired over 400 ballistic missiles since June 14th. That's a huge number.
400.
But
Wow.
and this is crucial, only about 20 actually hit urban areas, largely because Israel's air defense systems like Iron Dome and others are pretty effective.
Only 20 out of 400 plus.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And some analysts are now saying that Iran's usable missile arsenal, the ones they can fire effectively, might drop below 500 in the coming days.
Below 500.
Which raises real questions about sustainability. Can they keep up that rate of fire if their stocks are dwindling like that?
That number, 500, it feels low somehow, given the scale we imagine. What does that tell us about the actual impact versus maybe the perceived threat of all those missile launches?
Well, it suggests there's maybe a gap between the sheer volume they're firing and how effective those strikes are actually being.
Right.
Maybe their targeting isn't as precise, or perhaps it just really highlights how good Israel's defenses have become. Could be a mix of both.
And of course, this escalation isn't happening in a vacuum. The region is watching closely. Turkey's President Erdogan, for instance, he's voiced concern, called the strikes a threat to nuclear diplomacy.
And linking into that, the UAE, another key player in the Gulf, they put out a pretty strong warning. They said this whole conflict could seriously destabilize the entire Gulf region.
So the ripple effects are a major concern.
Huge concern. It just underlines that even while you have this diplomatic stalemate, Europe pushing talks, the U.S. weighing its options, neighbors are really worried this could spin out of control and affect everyone.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this deep dive up. To recap for you, we've seen this dangerous escalation enter its second week. We've talked about the tragic rise in civilian costs, the stalled diplomacy, Iran basically saying no talks under fire, and this big question mark hanging over potential direct U.S. intervention. It's a really volatile mix.
It really is. And in a situation moving this fast, this volatile, understanding of the specifics is key, isn't it? The specific actions, the reactions like the targeted strikes, the missile numbers, the red lines in diplomacy, but also seeing how they fit into that bigger picture.
The regional dynamics, the international pressure.
Exactly. It's about seeing the whole chessboard, not just the individual moves. That's crucial right now.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you to mull over. Considering what we've heard about Iran's maybe dwindling missile stocks and this very specific hybrid warfare approach from Israel, what might that suggest about how military strategies could evolve on both sides going forward?
Interesting question.
And maybe more broadly, how could this ongoing evolution of conflict reshape the balance of power there in the Middle East? Not just tomorrow, but, for the longer term. Definitely something to keep thinking about as you continue to seek out those informed perspectives.